Okay, I think that should work now. I think I needed to put myself on the stage, which I hadn't done. Can you guys hear now? Yay. Excellent. It's so funny because I can't hear anyone talking back to me, so it's really strange. If anyone wants to join me, you are welcome to. I hate having to just talk to myself. So I've never done a live with a presentation before, so bear with me, guys. I'm going to try and make sure that I get the slides moving and I read the chat and I keep some level of organization too. Thanks for joining me, guys. I know there's a few of you guys already in here. I know that Rick Snay is still on his live, so I imagine a lot of people are still there, but we might get started anyway, and then people can always watch on the replay. So today I've got a fairly organized live because we're going to talk about something that I think is massive in the case against Richard Allen. I think that there is data that can blow open this case. And I'm so excited about the data that I've been looking at. So just to start off, we'll do a disclaimer while we're also waiting for some others to join. I am clearly not a digital expert or a digital forensic expert. You can probably tell from the way that I'm struggling to even manage this live stream. I don't have any qualifications or training or experience in digital forensics. I'm also not a legal professional either. And so any of the information that I offer today is just from my own research at home. What I am, as many of you already know, is a clinical psychologist. And I think the skills that brings me is the ability to communicate information in a way that's easy to digest. So a lot of my job as a clin psych is to do what we call psychoeducation. And what that means is we try to educate our clients around complex brain, cognitive, behavioral, relational aspects of the human mind. And so we kind of translate a lot of neuroscience and cognitive science into kind of narratives that are easy to digest for people without a background. I'm going to get distracted by the chat, guys, but that's okay. Keep chatting to me. But if you do notice I'm pausing, it's probably because I'm reading what you guys are saying. So as a psychologist, I think a really key part of our role is being able to clearly communicate information to others, to our clients. And so whilst I'm not communicating psychological information as such, when it comes to today's topic, it is still communicating information that is fairly layered and complicated, as I know very well from being a novice to this area, trying to understand it myself. Sometimes I think that the best people to teach us things are the people who've just learnt them themselves too. Sometimes an expert knows so much that it's hard to kind of water it down, I suppose. And I'm clearly not an expert, so I can easily water this down for you guys. I've had a bit of feedback on the presentation because I did put the link up for people to have a look at on Reddit, on X, and on the community page for the YouTube. And some people have had a look and it seems like it is pretty organized and helpful. So I hope that it's helpful to everybody. You can follow along today in the video. You can also click on the link in the community section of YouTube. It's an active live document, so I am still adding to it as we go along. Is the sound okay, Shibby? Am I pretty clear? Because I'm just on my laptop, no mic, and my cat is sitting right next to the laptop, so I hope he's not causing any interference. Hey, Dino. Nice to see you. Excellent. So one thing before we get started as well is if you guys have a question or a comment in relation to anything that we're speaking about, if you want to correct me because you know something that I don't know, because you may have much better understanding of this topic area than I do, then please let me know. Maybe put like a capital Q at the front so that I know that that's a question to address while I'm going live. Hey, Mimi, nice to see you here. So what I'll do as I go along is I will pause and check the chat, but I'll try not to read the chat consistently just because otherwise I will probably get off track. But I will just sort of scan it as we go along, and then I'll certainly go back and read everything. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. You guys are my lovely, loyal, faithful friends, and I really appreciate you all. Other disclaimer, which I think I've got on the next page, is that everything that I'm talking about here is just for educational and entertainment purposes. I'm also just speculating on things. I'm not suggesting that I have evidence to prove any misdeeds by anyone, but I'm just basically forming some, I guess, circumstantial evidence to suggest that maybe there's some things going on that aren't fair and potentially also aren't legally okay. Hey, Hebby, thank you for joining. And thank you, Hebby and Shibi, for being my mods today. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's get started because I've already been babbling for 7 minutes and I've not said anything particularly helpful yet. So today we're going to talk about Rick's phone. So Rick's phone data, looking at geofencing and tower dumps. Rick's phone and his data seems to be something that hasn't been discussed at all, really, in during the trial, and even as much in online communities. I think there's a lot of talk about Libby's phone. There was some talk about geofencing in general in relation to third-party culprits, but nobody seems to be talking very much about Rick and what his phone movements show. And so today I'm going to go through the basics of what data law enforcement and the defense should have had and how that could be used and probably should have been used to potentially exonerate Richard Allen. I'm really hopeful that all of this information put together does form a really good basis for an appellate issue and does form a really good basis for further digital forensic analysis that could help provide Rick Allen with an alibi. I'm maybe overly hopeful. As everybody knows about me, I'm incredibly passionate and excitable. I get too excited and post about 700 tweets in one day. And I know that's probably what annoys some people about me because I'm over the top. I just really care about this case. And I care about the innocent man that I do believe is in custody at the moment. And I care about those two girls who I don't believe have received true justice at this time. So I am excitable. I may be completely overreaching here with what I'm suggesting, and that's why I wanted to present it to you guys and see what you think. So from a factual perspective in terms of, am I actually correct in some of the assumptions I'm making about the digital forensic data, and also from just a human being kind of logical mind perspective. If you hear what I'm saying and it doesn't make sense, or you have rebuttals to it or questions that are unanswered, then please make sure that you do raise them. This is kind of like a group think, essentially, of like actually, I don't really like groupthink usually, but in its traditional form, but it's collaboration, and it's us working together as a team and using the amazing advantage of multiple minds. So groupthink officially means more like a sort of cultish kind of behavior where people just agree blindly with the group and go along with it. So that's why I don't like groupthink, but I do love collaboration. So it's like a multidisciplinary team meeting about the Rick Allen case. Okay, so still babbling. Let's get into it. So did law enforcement suppress the data that could exonerate Rick Allen? So very early on in me looking into this case with basically doing a deep dive, I believed that Rick Allen being cleared was not a mistake. And I think a lot of us believe that. All of us that believe Rick Allen is innocent believe that. Now, one of the hypotheses that I had about why Rick Allen was cleared back in 2017 was that they probably cleared him on the basis of his phone data. And the reason I thought that was because of the fact that they went to the lengths of removing the battery to get the phone identifier information for Rick Allen back in 2017. So to me, that indicated they were using those phone identifiers to link people to various digital information that they had around the crime scene and the crime window. It would also be a very, very clear path to ruling people in and out, because essentially if their stories matched up with the phone data that was showing on the tower dumps and geofencing, then we could be fairly conclusive that they were telling the truth and that they weren't at the scene of the crime. Now, I know that there is some debate about how conclusive phone tracing, I guess, tracking is, but realistically, I think that in a case of kind of ruling out suspects, goodness, I'm already losing my words. In the case of like looking at witness statements and marrying them up with the digital data, I think you could get very clear pictures of people's movements, particularly in the area of the trails, which wasn't an area where there were hundreds of people. We're not talking Times Square in New York City. And so on the trails that day, in that time window, there weren't copious amounts of people. I think it would be quite clear that you would be able to see that devices pinging together may have been the groups of people, and you would see at least a sort of gist of the person's movement that day. Now, because Rick Allen was there alone, they would not have been able to corroborate his story with a witness who was there with him. He didn't see anyone that he knew. As opposed to people like Cheyenne Mills and Bree Wilbur and the Shelbys, I always forget which one's which, and Daniel Pearson, who all had someone else with them at least part of the time. Rick Allen didn't have anyone with him, and he didn't see or wasn't seen by anyone. And so the phone data would have been a really, really good way to pretty convincingly determine whether Rick Allen's story about leaving the trails before the crime held up to the evidence. I believe that's why they cleared him, and that's why they didn't go back to him again, because he wasn't a particularly useful witness to them. He didn't see anything, and he left before the crime. So this is why I've always been so fixated on the IMEI, MEAD stuff, where I've been really quite fixated on the geofencing, because I think that it would have the power to provide exculpatory evidence. And the exciting thing about that is that that information is still available. Initially, I was worried because I thought, well, it's been more than 5 years. It's now been 7 years, but so maybe too late because, phone records don't last that long. But now that we know for a fact that tower dumps were done and that they were in discovery, that's already one line of information. And then we also know for a fact that there is some stage 1 geofencing data, if not stage 2 and 3. So there is definitely information available, most likely already in discovery, that could trace Rick's movements and may prove to be at least part of the case for exonerating this man. This is why I'm so excited. So I'm talking already about tower dumps and geofencing. Let's get into what they actually are, because if you're anything like me, you had no idea what they are. I literally have learned all of this in the last several weeks, to be honest. I knew nothing about this going in. So let's see if I can try and explain it to you. Okay, so the agenda today, we're going to talk about tower dumps. Gosh, I feel like a lecturer here, guys. I'm not, clearly. So tower dumps, geofencing, cast, Cheyenne Mills, and appellate relevance, and kind of go-to steps from here. Now, again, I am not an expert. I am not trying to say that I have it all figured out, but I do think that I have threaded together a lot of information that forms a pretty coherent narrative that I think is worthy of exploration for sure. The reason that I have this agenda and the PowerPoint, by the way, guys, is just to keep me organized. It's not about me trying to be a teacher here. This is not about me trying to think that I'm an expert educating everybody today. It's more about a discussion. But for me, as somebody who goes off on 700 tangents, a brain that just can't sit still for very long, I thought it would be better for me to have some slides to kind of keep me on track as well. Okay, so let's actually get started. So tower dump data. Now, law enforcement did request cell tower dumps in 2017. These were provided in discovery. So what does a tower dump record show us? Well, carrier records for all devices connected to a tower sector at specific times is what is obtained in a tower dump. So the info would include timestamps, device ID, activity type, so whether someone is calling, texting, using data, and it would also provide which tower that they are pinging off, as well as sector ID. So sector ID, interestingly, and this is something I've learned, is each tower is divided into sectors. You can see in the picture here. Now, sometimes these sectors can be, I believe, 6 or 8 even, maybe, I'm not sure. But in the case of more rural areas, I believe that a lot of the time the sectors may only be divided into 3, so at 120-degree angles from each other. And so basically, if they are doing a dump on this tower in this picture here, it would be able to tell us that it was pinging off that tower and which of those sectors it was pinging off at various points. Now, there are lots of pings apparently that occur over time. So your device will ping when you're on a call, it will ping when it changes sectors or bounces off different towers. It will ping when even when background syncing is occurring, when there's movement around. There's various ways that it can. And again, I might be mixing things up a little bit there, so feel free to correct me, but I think that's the overall sense that I've got of this data. So it's going to provide copious data. Even if you only had 20 phones pinging off a tower, you're going to have 20 phones and all of their timestamps over a course of the period that you've requested a tower dump for. So I have no doubt that the tower dump data provided in Discovery is massive. It's a huge, huge file, right? But that doesn't have to be problematic when it comes to tracing a phone where we have the known device ID. So hold that in mind, because we do have the known device ID for Rick Allen. We have the Mead hex number. So we'll come back to that, but this is why the tower dump data could absolutely be sort of searched in order to find all the pings for Rick's phone. Okay, so let's look at cell towers in Delphi. As far as I'm aware, there are only 2 known towers in Delphi. And from the searches that I've done, they are located in the following areas. So I got ChatGPT, my best buddy, to plot the location of the towers in relation to the Monon High Bridge and the crime scene and Rick's home. And it's really hard to tell, but they potentially are covered by the same cell tower, the Wells Tower. Whether they're covered by the same sector or not is also hard to tell. We kind of calculated a rough sort of angle arc, I suppose, from the tower for Rick's house, his address at Whiteman Drive, and the crime scene, and I got a difference of about 108 degrees. So it could be within the same sector if the sector lines just happen to be at those 2 spots. But it's quite likely that it's not. It's quite likely that it could actually be in two different sectors. Additionally, if you look at the map and the direction that Rick would need to go between his house and the bridge, he potentially again would ping off the other tower or other sectors as he was driving to and from the trails that day. So we may even see him switch sectors. So now, obviously, if we can see a phone switching sectors or towers, this is a pretty good indication that the phone is moving around. And that could be quite a potential way of tracking, again, when Rick went to and left the trails that day. It's not 100% accurate. There'd certainly be a degree of doubt in the certainty of it. However, it could still give us a general gist of movement. But there's more than that. There's more information that we can get than just which tower and sector was he pinging off at each time period. So just another slide here where you can have a look at, this is the plotting of the two towers in relation to Rick's home and the Monon High Bridge. So you can see they probably both covered by the singular tower, which is the Wells Tower. So the chances are he potentially would be in that same area throughout the duration of the crime. But whether they're in the same sector is hard to tell. As you can see, the angle there, if these were both on the edge of the sector, potentially it's the same sector. But if, let's say, the sector were across like this, then they'd be in different sectors. And that could be incredibly useful if that is the case. I don't know what the sectors are for the towers. Don't know how you figure that out. I'm pretty sure it's not widely available to the general public. So, yeah. But we do know is that law enforcement, that forensic experts would be able, digital experts would be able to obtain that data and figure that out. Okay, so I did allude, though, that to there being more that we can get from the tower dump than just the location. So we've got movement between sectors and towers that can give an overall pattern. It isn't GPS coordinates, so I'm not suggesting that that's going to completely track Rick Allen's movements like a little, I don't know, thinking of like a microchip or something. So, but it could give a rough indication of movement. But there's also what we call, what we've kind of named here, behavioral timeline value. Because those tower pings provide information about whether it's a call, a text, data sessions, and idle, keep alive, so background syncs, you could actually map that to show what the phone was doing. So, for example, if someone's having a long data session, it's likely that they are manually using the phone on an app, like checking stocks. If you're getting short, infrequent blips, then it's likely background sync, which suggests that the phone is idle. If there's no activity at all, it's not pinging, then that would indicate that the phone was off, out of range, in aeroplane mode. So this would actually really help investigators and the defense to reconstruct a behavioral timeline during the crime window. So they'd be able to actually, again, looking at the pings of Rick's phone over the course of that day, February the 13th, they'd be able to sort of have a rough idea of how he was using his phone during the day, when it was off, when it was on, when it was in range or out of range. And there'd be still obviously not 100% clarity, but it would probably, again, create quite a good picture of what was going on for Rick on that day. So that's I think we're about to go into geofencing. I guess I just want to stop for a minute. I know there's not lots of people in here, but there are a few of my lovely loyal people who've come to see what I have to say today. Any questions, comments so far? Any thoughts about what we've discussed so far? I'm just looking through the chat to see, but I don't think so. I got my faithful mods here having a nice chat. So I might just keep going then. And so now we're going to geofencing data. Now, most people, when I raise geofencing data, say, well, geofencing data was suppressed. And it was, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's, I've just gone back a slide. But let's still look at it. Let's see what it would actually provide. We know that there is some geofencing data in discovery. I believe stage 1 geofencing data that was obtained in 2019. That would be still incredibly useful for Rick's team to look at, to, again, decipher where Rick's phone was, what it was doing during that key window. So what does geofencing do? Well, it's basically law enforcement can request geofencing data from Google, and it's basically asking which devices are inside a particular circle at this time. So what they would have probably done is they would have determined a sort of area around the crime scene and the trails that day that they wanted to kind of look into further and know which devices, or how many devices initially, because it's anonymous in stage 1, how many devices were showing up in that area that day. So, you know, obviously it's going to be important to know who and what devices were around the crime scene area and the trails between particularly probably 12 and 5 p.m. And so in order for a phone to show up in geofencing, though, it does need to be signed in to a Google account. It needs to have location services enabled, and the device needs to be actively sharing data. Now, in 2017, most people had smartphones. Most people had Google accounts. But most of us also were not in the habit of switching off all location services. So realistically, if you were walking the trails that day with a smartphone, you would ping and show up in the geofencing data. So we know that in 2019, there was a geofencing warrant. It was discussed in the hearings pre-trial from the 30th to the 1st of August. I don't remember the exact days, but it shows up in those hearings. I believe that's to do with the motion in limine. So if you want to have a look there, you can see Jennifer Roger basically arguing for more access to more information around this, and also for the relevance in terms of Rick's defence. And we hear McClelland wanting this suppressed. We'll talk a little bit more about interpretations of this over time. Just going to start off by giving you the skeleton, and then we'll go into my potential interpretations of this. Okay, so practical reality check, because, and this I put in here because someone could say, well, Rick may have turned off location services. Look, you know, he may have. It's highly unlikely, though. They were a default for Android smartphones. We believe that Rick has been an Android user. Yay, go Android users. Anyone using Chrome, Gmail, stock apps would almost certainly have location services running. Very few average users knew how or why to turn it off. So Rick owned, most likely, an Android smartphone. He indicated that he was checking stocks, so clearly he had a phone that was internet capable. 2017 was well beyond the time where we all started to have, you know, iPhones and Androids and phones that connected to the internet, had apps, had Google accounts. So yeah, and he noted that he was looking at a stock ticker on the trail. So his phone should be captured in the geofencing data from that period. I'm going to guess that they didn't just cast a net around the crime scene itself, but around the entire trails. And so given that Rick said that he did go to the trails that day, and the geofencing warrant, I believe, was from around 12-ish, 12:30-ish to 5, then there's no reason that Rick should not be showing up at some point in that, because that's his own statement. He was at the trails that day. So potentially, again, we've got information here that could show us Rick was on the trails that day, and when he arrived, when he left, or at least when he left, even if he arrived before the window that they're looking at. Again, though, a little bit of a complication with geofencing data. It's not as easy as us getting a list of who was there in that circle at all times. It will be an extensive list of pings, and it will be anonymous at stage 1. So we know that they definitely had stage 1 data. Again, that was discussed at the hearings. This is a massive sort of spreadsheet, I'm imagining, of device IDs with location points within the geofence. So this would be multiple pings for each phone as that person is in that geofence area, interacting with their phone, moving around even, would create pings to show up. So again, this is a really good way of tracing a device's movement within the geofence. And again, a great way to corroborate witness statements, a great way to understand people's movements that day. Now, stage 1 is anonymous, so you're not going to be able to look at that and say, well, here's Rick's phone, let's see what it's doing. You will just be able to say device A does this, device B does this, device C does this. But again, if you marry that up with known witness statements, you're going to be able to have a pretty good idea of who's who. If you've got 2 or 3 phones, in a row, kind of walking side by side, essentially, then it's most likely the group of girls, right? I don't know how many of the girls had phones. So that's why I said it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4. But you'd be able to sort of start to kind of understand how that lines up. Now, again, this is going to be a lot of data because it isn't just the number of phones present, it's all the pings from those phones as well. And this is why it is so many lines of data. I can't remember the number that Jennifer gives in the pretrial hearing, but it is a lot. The thing is, what they can then do is when they notice any phone that they're kind of suspicious of or more interested in, they can then go and request stage 2 data from Google, which would give broader location history. So this will give location history for those selective devices beyond the geofence. So this could be if you see a device sort of moving around and you think, oh, that might be Rick Allen's phone, you could request stage 2. It would still be anonymous, but it would show then, did that phone then go to Whiteman Drive? Right? And then at stage 3, again, you'd need to provide another warrant to Google for this, but this is where we can then unmask the device ID. Now, they don't routinely do stage 3 for all data in a geofence because that is the kind of people worry obviously about privacy, and there is no need to identify every single device in an area. However, you would do that probably for those devices very much in the kind of close proximity to the crime scene, with any suspicious detail, movement, any that you can't figure out who they belong to based on witness statements, particularly because this is a small area. So what we would expect is that all of the witnesses that came forward would be showing up on that geofence, and you'd be able to kind of trace what they said with the sort of pings around the geofence. So it will show you, not obviously again tracking it sort of second by second, but what it will show is the overall movement of those people over, with intervals maybe of 1 to 5 minutes in between. But that would still give you a pretty good idea, pinged at Freedom Bridge, pinged at Mears, pinged at south side of the bridge. So it would still give a really good amount of information still. Okay, so it's not fail safe, but it certainly would provide a general gist of movement. And again, in a case like this where, oh, sorry, I flicked ahead now a few slides. What am I doing? In a case like this where there won't be huge amounts of devices in the area, you're going to be able to track out the 10 or 20 devices that were certainly on the trails that day and within the geofence. So that's the geofencing. From my understanding of the pre-trial hearings, Jennifer was referring to stage 1 data and requesting stage 2 and 3, and of course that was not being provided easily by the state. Enough said, right? So another thing that came up in those pretrial hearings was the cast report. Now, again, I'm not going to try to define what a cast report is. I have no expertise in this, but my understanding is that there are youth programs, and it's usually done by the FBI team, and what they do is they combine the geofencing data with the tower data, and they basically are able to sort of really narrow down and pinpoint, almost triangulate certain devices. And so what do we know about this? So courtesy of All Eyes on Delphi's amazing resource on her website, I have screenshotted here what we have heard about. Now, most people have heard about this. This is the 3 phones that pinged very close to the crime scene, I believe within 100 yards, 60 to 100 yards, during that key window, 12:39 to 5:49. Now, this comes up a lot because obviously this seems incredibly suspicious. These 3 phones seem to be, clearly, wouldn't they be the people who are involved in the crime if they're the only phones pinging in the crime scene during that time? I think there's more to it than that. And I may be misunderstanding, but when I read this, they ping at one time point, not multiple. So to me, that suggests that they only ping at that point in passing, which means that they're actually just passers-by. They're people walking around, driving around in the nearby area. Now, I don't know the distance of the crime scene to, other things in and around the area. So I'm not trying to sort of say that I'm just reading what Peggy's saying. The prosecutor's legal brief did an excellent job explaining cast. Excellent. Yep. So yeah, I mean, look, I'm not trying to suggest that I understand it completely, because I definitely don't. But yeah, apparently they identified these 3 devices. But from what I'm reading, and I could be wrong, they are only pinging once. So my sense is that these devices are random people in and around the area. Now, my understanding is that none of those three devices are linked to a suspect. So they did unmask these using the geofencing data. We don't know who they belong to, but my understanding is that none of those three devices were linked to anyone suspicious. I don't believe that they were linked to any of the key third-party potential suspects that we all talk about. What we do know is that Rick's phone was not one of them. What we don't know is, did Libby's phone also show up in that area? They say that those three phones were not Libby's and they were not Rick's. So Rick's phone was not active in that area, but it doesn't say that Libby's phone wasn't active in that area. It just says that there were three unknown devices. Well, Libby's phone isn't an unknown device, so I would imagine that Libby's phone potentially does show up in that area under the geofencing report, because Libby's phone, we do know, was on. We do know that it was connected to apps. It was an iPhone, but most iPhones still have Google accounts too, particularly in 2017. Again, I don't know. I'd be curious about that, because I really wonder if geofencing, again, could really clear up the girls' movements as they went down the hill, rather than using Apple Health data where we're kind of having to scrutinize elevations and times and things like that, which is really actually not super accurate or helpful either. And this is why it's such a contentious issue. If there is indeed geofencing data for Libby's phone, then we'd be able to actually pinpoint a little bit more about the movements. Again, this could completely debunk the state's timeline. Interesting that nobody's discussed it. Nobody's explained if it has been done, if it hasn't been done, why it hasn't been done. I mean, sure, if her phone is not in the geofencing, then potentially she just didn't have, a phone that was capable of being traced by geofencing. But I find that hard to believe, and I think it's something that probably needs to be cleared up. So the conclusion, though, I guess that I've made, and again, it could be a false conclusion, guys, so you let me know, but is whoever committed this crime likely had their phone off or in airplane mode. So there is no phone pinging consistently in that area from a tower dump perspective or a geofence perspective, which suggests that not only would location services and Google aspects be turned off, but would also means that the phone was potentially turned off or in airplane mode. Now, of course, this is where the people who believe Rick's guilty go, yeah, see, told you so. Rick's guilty. He switched his phone off. It's, consciousness of guilt and all of that sort of stuff. Well, potentially, but not necessarily. So we know that Rick wasn't one of those phones, but we don't know if he appeared in other tower dumps or geofencing data. If his phone is pinging elsewhere at that time, and if his if the geofence kind of tracking is tracing him somewhere else, then his phone's clearly on. We can't use the excuse of his phone's off, but we can say that he's somewhere else. So we know that in 2017, Doolan took out the battery to find the phone identifiers. So in this case, for Rick's phone, it wasn't an IMEI, it was a Mead hex, but still really useful data. Rick's 2017 phone was not found during the execution of the search warrant in 2022. So I think a lot of people then say, well, you can't trace his phone. Well, guess what? You can. The Mead hex info is enough to locate Rick's pings. And I wonder, was this ever done? So Rick's phone. I'm going to get back to what guilters might say about Rick's phone. Did he leave it at home if it is pinging, but it's not pinging the crime scene? We'll get back to that in a minute. But let's just, again, look at Rick's phone and what we could find using his Mead hex, if nothing else. So if his phone is pinging, it means the phone is on. If the phone is not pinging, it means the phone is off or in airplane mode or not within that tower area or out of range. So first question that we'd have, I suppose, looking at the tower dumps is Rick's device in the tower dumps? When is it pinging? Is it pinging at all? Because that's going to straight away tell us, did he have his phone on for part of the day? Did he have his phone on all day? Did his phone never ping? Was he not there at all? Was it pinging throughout? And I'm just not sure why we don't know that, because that would be helpful potentially for one side or the other. I'm just going to pause for a minute. Oh, thank you, Shibi. Really appreciate that. I hope I'm like pacing this okay and everyone's following. I'm getting into the kind of groove now of doing it, but I also know I'm a passionate over talker, and I can be quite loud. So yeah, let me know if I need to go back or pace anything. All right, so yeah, so basically, if Rick's phone is pinging, this is where we can get that not only, potential locations and ideas of where he was, but it can also tell us a little bit about his movement. I'm sorry, I just said movement, about his activity. So if the phone's on and pinging, we can determine, is it idle? Because if it's on and it's pinging and doing sort of background pinging, then that suggests that the phone is on, but no one's interacting with it, and it's potentially just sitting in one spot, i.e. maybe just at home. If it's moving between sectors and towers, likely that he's on the go, he's driving, or he's walking, I suppose, but in a way that goes between sectors. But yeah, you'd be able to see that. And if you see normal activity, and what I mean by that is texting, little bits of data, then that's going to be kind of what most of us would have on our phone at various points. So at the moment, for example, my phone is sitting beside me as I talk. It would be only showing idle pings in the tower that I'm pinging off. But throughout the day, you're going to see me on Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, lots of data. You'll see the occasional text, and you'll barely ever see a call because I'm not a phone call person. I hate phone calls. But yeah, you'd get a pretty good idea of what's going on for me during the day based on what my phone is doing, right? So again, it's not like a moment by moment, video recording of what somebody is doing. It's not going to help us go, well, he was on this side at this time doing this, but it is going to help us get an overall pattern of behavior. Now, obviously, if there's no pings, that is suspicious. I'm not going to lie. If it turns out that Rick's phone shows no pings during that day, or it certainly stops pinging during the crime window, then you know what? I potentially would lean back guilty. I just don't believe that's the case, because I believe if that was the case, surely McClelland would have loved to throw that out there as evidence for the jury to see. So the info can be used to interpret what Rick was doing during that crucial time window, and I'm really, really interested in what it shows. Okay, so let's keep going. So let's just do a little bit of a rebuttal to the guilters out there. Now, no shade on guilters. As anyone who knows me in the community will find, I am not against people having a different opinion. In the Reddit subreddit that I developed, that I started, there are plenty of people. In fact, I think it's about 50-50 people who believe he's guilty and people who believe he's innocent. I have no drama with people who think he's guilty, as long as they're not being nasty and mean. And there are plenty of people who think he's guilty who are open-minded and willing to look at the evidence. So, yeah, I think it's just about keeping an open mind. But the guilters will often say, and sorry, guilters sounds like a mean name, but yeah, no shade. He had his phone off to hide himself during the crime, right? That's the first thing you hear when anyone brings up he wasn't one of the 3 phones, right? But the thing is, if that's true, the tower dump data will show that he did not ping at all during the window of the crime. And if that's true, why didn't the state use this as evidence of consciousness of guilt and show that he lied about being on a stock ticker? I mean, you've got a double whammy there. You can say, well, he had his phone off, like Brian Koberger, for example. And secondly, they would be saying, and he lied as well, because both in 2017 and in 2022, he does say that he was likely on his stock ticker. So he's now lying about what he was doing and, on the trails that day. And he's got his phone off. Doubly suspicious, right? The reality is, I don't think that's what the data shows. And that is why we have not heard that. then the guilters will say, well, he left his phone at home to hide himself during the crime, because if it's pinging in the background throughout the crime, and it's not in the area of the crime scene, then basically people will say, well, he's guilty, but he left his phone at home. Now, of course, that's possible. I believe that there are some individuals, EF might be one of them, where the phone seems to be pinging at home all day and idle. So yes, that is suspicious. I agree. And again, if that's what the phone data shows, I would be looking a little bit more into that and maybe questioning my certainty about Rick Allen's innocence. However, again, if that was true, the state would have used that as evidence. The state would have used it as evidence to show that he left his phone at home. Again, consciousness of guilt. But if Rick's phone pinged the towers during the time frame and the activity was analysed, it could provide vital information to form a behavioural timeline. So mapping the pings and activity would tell us whether he was scrolling at home, driving, walking around, idle or silent. And if normal use overlaps the crime scene, that's pretty exculpatory. It's highly unlikely that he is abducting two girls and murdering them and staging this awful crime scene while checking his stocks, on the phone to Kathy, texting, so that would already be some good exculpatory information. Also, actually, I'm just skipping ahead. No. So also, if he is showing up as pinging during the crime window, and he's not one of those three phones identified by cast, then that suggests that he is in the vicinity, which is a massive tower, massive sector, but also that he is not at the crime scene. So again, how do we make sense of that? How is he telepathically committing the crime? And being silly here, but it's ridiculous, right? Either his phone is off or at home, and that explains then why he's not showing up in those phones in the crime scene. Or if his phone is on and it's pinging and there's activity and movement, then he is not the killer. So, it's absolutely vital to look at behaviorally what that data shows. I'd love to be able to see that. It'd be amazing. So, additionally, even stage 1 geofencing data could help identify people on the trails that day. So I kind of explained this before, but while it's anonymous, it provides repeated pings that could be married up to witness statements and tower dump data. So if we have stage 2 data, then on top of that, we could have even more information about movements outside the geofence. So we could see, did Rick Allen then go home? Where did he come from? Did he come from his mum's house, like he said? Did he go home and then he came to the bridge? You'd really get a good idea of his movements over that period of time. And of course, if we get to stage 3 data, we can identify or uncover the identity of each device. So Rick's phone movements could be identified using tower dumps and stage 1 geofencing data alone, both of which are in discovery. And the reason I put that in red in capitals with a exclamation mark is this is so important. I don't, but his team has this information. And so they can figure out his movements that day. And when they do that, unless it's suspicious, this is highly exculpatory. And the chances are it isn't suspicious, because if it were, are we really to imagine that McClelland wouldn't have used that against him? So why wasn't it analysed? I don't know. Maybe it was, and maybe there really was no conclusive information. I find that hard to believe. But one of the things that was telling was listening to Andy Baldwin being interviewed by Andy Kopser. I think it was like several weeks ago now. And she directly asked this question. I was so glad she did, because it was a question on my mind. And he said he didn't think that they could do that. So this suggests to me that the defense didn't focus on this. Their focus was on other people in the geofencing data, not on Rick's movements. That's how they argued it in the hearings. So I wonder, was it analysed? And if it was analysed and it didn't provide any benefit, I'm kind of doubtful of that, because I do think the state would have used it. Now, some people will say, well, it was probably analysed, but it was unclear. I still just don't see how that could be the case, because if it's either going to show that he he did have his phone on and he was moving around, which is clearly exculpatory, or it's going to show that he didn't have his phone on, and that is a really like quite a clear indicator of potential, not clear indicator, but a potential indicator of guilt. So I think the data has to be useful to one side or another. It can't be completely wholly inconclusive based on my understanding. So now we get to the point that, like I said, everybody raises when we say, well, this could have actually helped Rick. And people will say, well, it was suppressed, so nothing you can really do about it. That's Gull's fault. And yes, I agree, Gull should not have excluded it. There's also an issue here, though, that the defense argued for geofencing to be included in terms of identifying other potential suspects. They didn't argue that it was particularly for maybe creating an alibi for Rick and substantiating his statement. So the defense tried to argue, look, these other phones were near the bridge. Maybe one of them belongs to serial killer. I've got that in quote marks. It's not a quote, but that's, kind of probably what they roughly said. Gull lumped the entire cast geofencing evidence into third party suspects category and said, again, not her exact words, you're using it to suggest others were present, so it's out. And McClellan said it's not accurate, which is inaccurate. Nick, it is inaccurate. The geofencing data is used in other cases, and it has been for many, many years. It is not highly inaccurate. Tower dump data alone, yes, that could, someone can ping and they could be miles away because that tower, particularly in a rural area, is covering a large amount of area, and we've only got the two towers. But geofencing would have been far more accurate. And usually can pinpoint, I believe, within 100 meters is my understanding. And certainly when we're dealing with multiple pings, then the chances are you're going to get a fairly good kind of overall kind of trend, if that makes sense. There may be outliers, but the overall trend and direction would be helpful still. So, of course, Skull excluded it. And this is a significant appellate issue. So here are the appellate angles, because I know for me, coming into this case again, I don't know enough about legal aspects of cases, and I remember making some silly statements. Well, they're not silly. Hindsight is 2020 about all these things that could have been used at appeal. Now, I understand what appeals are and how they're different from PCR and trial, and I recognise that the appellate angles are different. They're not about finding new evidence and showing his alibi, but what they are about is showing that there were procedural issues. And there's a massive procedural issue here. Judge Gull cannot exclude evidence that directly rebuts the state's case. If they looked at the geofencing data and it indicates Rick's movements and is exculpatory, that's a direct alibi and exculpatory argument. So it's not good enough to deny it. The problem is how the defense did argue it. They did argue more about alternate phones, but even if they didn't argue it necessarily in the best way, the problem is still that Gull should not have suppressed that. Obviously, there could be appellate issues around the defense not providing adequate counsel as well. But I think, the biggest issue here is Gull suppressing information that actually had exculpatory potential, wasn't just about suggesting and throwing shade at other people. Okay, so second part of this. This was something I came across yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the night before. I was laying in bed, and I know I thought about Cheyenne Mills and what she had said. A little bit of her testimony that just rang in my brain and made me go, wait a minute, did they actually have more phone data that helped them trace people in 2017? So before I get to Cheyenne Mills, who, to be honest, is a very wronged person in this. It's not very fair. She sounded like she truly gave a damn. She was, I think, only 17 at the time, and she called up the very next day to let them know she was on the trails and was treated really meanly by people and dismissed. And that really sucks. That's not very fair. She actually did a really responsible thing, and she didn't deserve to be dismissed. I think she subsequently had a fair amount of stress on social media as well. So shout out to Cheyenne if she ever sees this. I'm so sorry for the way that people treated you. You don't deserve that. And imagine this. Imagine if you, Cheyenne, are the person whose little Easter egg in your testimony actually blows this case wide open. Ha ha to them then for dismissing you, right? I love a good underdog story. Anyway, just before we go into Cheyenne, any questions? So if you have, because I have missed some of the chat, so if there's any questions or comments, anyone want to contradict what I'm saying, totally fine. That's what we're meant to be doing here. But yeah, anything that you guys want to let me know that you'd like me to answer or change. Hello to everybody as well. I haven't said hello as everyone's come in and out, but really appreciate you guys. So just going to give you a couple of minutes and I'll scroll the chat too to see if there was anything that people wanted to raise. I'm reading some of the comments and I'm like, huh? Like, well, what are you guys talking about? I'm kind of out of the loop today. I did think of recording this and then like playing it and then I could have joined the chat, but we're talking about can openers. Okay, guys, here we go. All right. Well, if there's any questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. Feel free to comment on the video. Come and join the subreddit, Delphi Mystery. Follow me on X at Daisy Asks. Yeah. I've also got my email address as well at the end of the presentation. You can click on the link for the presentation. I'll try and put that link in the description of the video today as well, but it is already on the channel on the community page. So there's lots of ways to get in contact with me. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not going to be upset about being wrong. I've been wrong multiple times throughout my deep dive into this case. I've evolved my opinions a lot since I started, and contrary to some people's opinions of me online, I'm very much open to feedback, as long as the feedback is not cruel and about personal things that don't matter in this case, right? So yeah, don't give me feedback on how annoying I am unless I'm doing something annoying to you specifically. And definitely don't give me feedback on how dumb I am without listening to what I have to say, because I don't think that's very fair. I don't think we should call anyone dumb. So yeah, for the record. Anyway, back to what we're talking about. Okay, so Cheyenne. So lovely Cheyenne, who deserves a little bit more respect, like a lot of us do. Okay. So I think that what's really interesting as well, just to do a little bit of a psychology angle to this, this case is so interesting because I guess the central dynamic of the case against Rick Allen to me is a person who is more sensitive and, smaller in terms of the system being bullied and shoved in a corner and unfairly treated. And so this dynamic is, this man who's not being heard, who's not having a voice, and not being allowed fairness, and this law enforcement community potentially, again, I'm just speculating, pushing him into a corner and potentially saying mistruths about him and defaming him. And it's so interesting because that's exactly what happens in the online community around this case too. And it's, again, another theme that is showing up here with Cheyenne Mills, a young woman who's called up, been diligent, and treated really poorly. So interesting, isn't it? It's a social dynamic that we can see here too that really needs to change. We really need to stop treating each other in harsh, dismissive, nasty ways. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse now. Let's get back to Cheyenne. Okay, so Cheyenne Mills' testimony. So I went through this yesterday because I'd remembered bits of it and I got the kind of key points. So This is her timeline. So February 14th, Cheyenne calls law enforcement to report that she had been on the trails. She gave them her name and phone number but felt dismissed. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that she was finally interviewed briefly. For about 10 minutes, police did not collect her phone information, the MEAD, IMEI. They did not take the photos that she had from the day. They asked a few questions. It says no notes were taken. I think that's ChatGPT adding lib when I got it to summarize. No, I think notes were taken, but there was no video recording and there was no follow-up at all. Interesting that, isn't it? Kind of similar to Rick's story here. In August 2017, approximately, around 6 months later, Cheyenne received a call from the FBI, but they asked for her mother. And as the phone was registered in her mum's name, she recognized what was going on here. They were calling because the FBI said the phone pinged in the area on the day of the murders, and Cheyenne explained, well, that was me. I was using that phone, and I've already spoken to police, and they said thank you, entered the call, and that was it until 2022. Interesting, right? So there was no further follow-up. Cheyenne just wasn't seen as particularly useful, apparently, to a law enforcement, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Cheyenne was on the bridge. She was one of the few people who walked across the bridge and actually went down, maybe not the same hill, but that area to go to the toilet. And so, I'm sorry, I believe she would be relevant. She was on the bridge during potentially the time that the crime was occurring. So interesting that they had no real interest in following her up, isn't it? Okay. So it seems that there was geofencing data in 2017, doesn't it? Because how on earth were they able to figure out or contact Cheyenne's mother and get the details of the pings of her phone around the crime scene? So there's a few aspects to this. First of all, the tower dumps would not have shown pings around the crime scene. Remember, the tower dumps involve the whole sector, and the sector is too big. There's no way they're following up every phone that pinged in that sector that day, because that would cover many, many, many phones. Yes, Delphi is not a massive area, but it is still also not a town of 3. So there's no way they were following up anyone that pinged in that sector during the crime window, because that would include a large amount of people. So how did they pinpoint that the pings were in the area of the crime? Well, that would require, to my understanding, geofencing data, because there weren't multiple towers. There's no other way of kind of getting more of a triangulated kind of idea of location, right? Secondly, if we were to believe, well, of course, they just followed up Cheyenne's phone because she was a known witness, then they should have been calling Cheyenne, but they weren't. They were calling for her mum. So to me, that looks like they've gone, oh, here's a device showing up in the area during the crime scene from geofencing. Let's unmask it and let's call the subscriber or the owner of the phone. So to me, that suggests that they had data to unmask phones in the area and track specific phones during that time. So really interesting to me. Like, I just really feel like this was something that was used to rule in and out other witnesses. Interesting that when FBI contacted her, when they realized it was Cheyenne, they ticked it off and they left it. They didn't do anything further. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, is this what they did with everybody's phone? And this is why I've got the cleared status on this slide, because I've always thought that's how Rick Allen was cleared. I think that he provided his MEAD hex. They followed that up with the data they had, and they were able to see that Rick did what he said he did and went home. That's why he was cleared. That's why he wasn't followed up. And a lot like Cheyenne, he wasn't super useful to them, didn't have any information to offer. But interestingly as well, Rick was there during, a key period, a crucial period, and it sort of seems like law enforcement didn't even care about those people. Maybe they didn't want any more detailed information, and I wonder why. I think a lot of us have suspicions of why they wouldn't want that information. So this is just kind of reiterating what I was saying. So they didn't know it was her phone. So if law enforcement had recorded or retained her February phone number properly, the FBI would not have needed to call the registered owner. They wouldn't have been unaware it was Cheyenne's number. They wouldn't have been surprised that it pinged in the area. So this shows the number was discovered later, not from her witness statement. As I said before, if the phone pinged in the area, that's not tower dump information. The only plausible explanation, as far as I can tell, and of course, again, happy to be debunked on this, but the most plausible explanation is that it was captured in geofence data. At the very least, stage 1 geofence data that then was married up with pings on the tower dumps, but at most it could have been stage 3 as well. Okay, so this matches the exact phrasing the FBI used: phone pinged in the area, a telltale sign of Google-derived geofence data. Okay, so last point. This wasn't a routine follow-up. They had her number. She'd already reported being there. This was not a follow-up of Cheyenne because she was a witness. It was a rediscovery of a known witness via digital data. It suggests the FBI or CAST team had already launched geofence analysis by August 2017. It did not commence in 2019, as the state claims. Now, I'm not suggesting they didn't officially request the geofencing data in 2019 as well, but clearly that wasn't the first time. Or not clearly, most likely or plausibly that wasn't the first time. So was the 2017 geofencing type data in discovery? Because it seems like in those hearings pre-trial, they're talking about 2019 geofence warrant. And was this 2017 data obtained through official channels? Do the FBI have it? Was it buried in discovery? It's really hard to know. As far as I guess my research has shown, and again, I could be wrong here, but it seems like you can actually, law enforcement potentially can get expedited information from services like Google and AT&T and things like that in a high-profile investigation like this. So this could have been done in the sort of days or weeks post murders, and it could have been the focus for them at that time to just get that information ASAP, and that potentially would bypass sort of more of the official warrants, and that therefore would not be necessarily officially recorded in discovery. But even if it is in discovery, has it been buried? It just feels like there's so much information here. It was provided in this sort of dribs and drabs. It was drip fed to the defense, and it just feels like even if it were there, it was manipulated in a way that the defense weren't alerted to what was useful in it. So this brings me to some more speculation and something I've always believed. That missing phone, another thing that the guilters love to bring up, that he disposed of his 2017 phone. And I've already said this, from a psychological perspective, that is ludicrous, because basically it's suggesting that the only naughty stuff he ever had on his phone was in 2017. Well, no, because that's actually usually not how predators work. They don't just suddenly have their sadistic killer era. Right? That's not how it works. If he had indicators of deviance and sadism, we would have seen other material or evidence on his other devices. So why just get rid of one device? He'd need to get rid of all of them. But here we go, right? I actually think it benefits law enforcement. And I've said this before. That's the way that they interviewed him in 2022 in that first interrogation. They picked him up, they brought him to the station. And then they kept him at the station while Liggett goes in and out and in and out. And later that day, they did the search on his house. My feeling is they got that search warrant signed during the period he was being interrogated, and that they executed that search warrant maybe as soon as he got home. He was at their will because he was with them. And they had to drive him back there. And my sense is he didn't get a chance to look for that phone. He didn't get a chance to kind of figure out if he did have that phone, because he didn't seem to be too concerned about trying to give it to them. And when you see the lineup of all of the other phones, the chances that that was the one phone that he did dispose of himself isn't likely. I know there are other benign explanations, like you could have traded in and stuff, but I worry and I wonder, was the 2017 phone conveniently lost not by Rick, but by people searching Rick's property? Now, this is speculation, this is alleged, so I'm not going to go further, but if we had Rick's phone from 2017, they could do Celebrite and all of those types of analysis. Again, don't pretend to understand that completely, but it would have provided more granular information about his movements and activities that day. And that could have proved catastrophic for the state's timeline. So I always say, like, why were they so quick to get in and execute the search warrant? It's been years. Why were they in such a rush? Why did they want Rick in the station without his vehicle that day? I mean, maybe that's just standard procedure. I don't know. I'm not in law enforcement. But, yeah, interesting, isn't it? Then we've got the Mead hex and the PCA. Now, this is something that I've gone on and on about from various angles, but doesn't it quite give the illusion of digital forensic analysis? Why on earth did they include that in the PCA? It didn't have any evidentiary value. It's not like it was saying, well, his phone was found there, or it was traced there, or it wasn't traced there. Why on earth did they have it in the PCA? It's not relevant. But it gives the illusion to the judge signing the PCA that they have phone information that supports the claims of his guilt. And on top of that, yeah, I'm sorry. No, that's all. I guess that's the main point I was going to make. The only time that I heard any reference to the Mead being used in this investigation is when they said that they looked at all the phones in that had been discovered in the search, and none of them matched that Mead hex number. So therefore, he didn't have the 2017 phone. Finally, and we've already mentioned this, we know that their discovery issues, slow dribble of data, poor organisation, missing geofence data, cast info in July, August 24. That was only 2 months before trial, and the defence still did not have the information that they needed. They still did not have the information about, the more detailed, granular information to do with the geofencing and cast. That's not okay. That was 2 months before trial. How on earth were they supposed to have it analysed by an expert? Because I guess the way I'm talking about cross-checking and looking at sounds like it's kind of like something you can just do easily. But of course you can't. It's lines and lines and lines and lines and lines of data and coordinates. It's not something you can just like plug in to ChatGPT and be like, oh, I track this person's movements. I mean, I would try it. Of course I would. Anyone who knows me knows I love ChatGPT. But yeah, interesting, right? And I remember looking at the defense experts, and they didn't, I think they did have some other digital forensic experts, but I don't know if they had anyone during that time frame when they finally got more of the geofence data. I presume, we still don't even know if they got all of the data, but they wouldn't have had enough time to look at this, even if they were looking at this angle, which unfortunately doesn't seem like they were. Why was McClellan so worried about geofence data and cust? Why did he want to suppress it so badly? It just sort of feels like the state had things to worry about, and so they found ways to give the illusion of doing a clear, thorough investigation, but they wanted to make sure that they suppressed and hid and underplayed things. They never made a big deal of Rick's movements that day. Why? Because potentially they knew that Rick's movements exonerated him. It's just potential, but I think there's a high potential. I think if we wrap all of this together, I believe that Rick Allen was cleared in 2017 on the basis of this, and I believe that that information was then buried. And so it would be literally a needle in a haystack for the defense. And then the defense were, on their own wild goose chases, well, not wild goose chases, because I do believe that stuff that they did pursue in his defense will be important in terms of the, finding the real perpetrators of the crime. But unfortunately, that focus wasn't helpful for Rick because, first of all, it wasn't allowed because of Gull's decisions, but also because I think there was this more direct exculpatory evidence against Rick. Sorry, no, evidence against Rick. Sorry, evidence to support Rick. I'm not against Rick. Contrary to some of the people who don't like me online, I'm certainly not a veiled guilter. I would not have wasted hours and hours, which I don't feel wasted, after working as, in my day job and raising my kids, sitting, trying to figure this out if I was a veiled guilter. So I'm not a veiled guilter. I'm absolutely pro-Rick unless any evidence ever shows me that he isn't factually innocent. And so far, there is no evidence to suggest that he is guilty. I only keep finding and stumbling upon evidence that suggests he is absolutely factually innocent. And on top of that, evidence that suggests the far more likely statistical possibility here than a man of Rick's profile suddenly committing a heinous crime, the more realistic, statistically, theory that I have around what's happening here is, and again, alleged law enforcement problematic handling of evidence in a suspicious way. And when I Googled, I didn't just Google, gosh, I did a Cecil there. When I looked at the research evidence, and I did also just do, I guess, a general search for what widely happens, the percentage of law enforcement deliberate problematic investigations, let's say, so like deliberately, like corruption especially, I guess, shows that there's a high percentage chance of that happening in a case than a man who is 44 years old, has no history of violence or deviancy, is actually well liked and has a long-term relationship, has a history of being someone who worries and cares about how other people see him, has raised a daughter who is doing well in her life, has held a steady job. The chances of him being the perpetrator of this terrible crime and then spending 5 years living as though nothing happened, and then when he gets when he's at interrogation, showing clearly, even the guilters can see he seems innocent, and then he suddenly decompensates in jail and confesses, multiple times. To me, it is highly unlikely that he is the perpetrator based on his psychological profile, as we've talked about. He would be a forensic unicorn. It's not impossible, but highly, highly statistically improbable, but not highly statistically improbable that law enforcement potentially made some poor choices in their way of investigating a crime. That is what stats tell us. That's not just pure opinion. And I'm a big believer in statistics. I am a psychologist. We have to study it for years. So I do believe that statistics are important and, again, create a large amount of reasonable doubt in terms of the case against Rick Allen. Okay, so it's not too late. So I really hope that his legal team have already done this or are working on this. They can check the discovery for geofencing data from 2017. They can check the tower dump data. They can search for the Mead hex, find the pings, analyze behavior of the phone that day, and they could check the 2019 geofence data stage 1. So even if they don't have the 2017 data, track the devices pinging in and around the trails during that key window, check it against known statements. So they'd be able to say device A looks like it must be Bree Wilbur, device B could be so-and-so, and they'd be able to basically, again, rule out which devices in that geofence are known to them, and potentially is there one in that geofence that isn't known to them, but that matches Rick's statement. Well, that sounds like that's Rick Allen. Now, whether they'd be able to then follow that up with, unmasking the device, maybe not. But again, this would all create reasonable doubt. And if we can create reasonable doubt that, that could exonerate him,
But even without doing all of this analysis, there is enough for this to be an appellate issue. An appeals, it's not about proving that the person is innocent. It's showing that due process was not followed. And in this case, the fact that this geofence data has the potential to provide more information about Rick Allen's whereabouts that day and corroborate his statement, and it was suppressed, well, that there is an appellate issue. Okay, well, that's kind of the conclusion of the presentation. I have sent information to lawyers. I have never had a reply from lawyers. Again, people who like to mock me will say that, I've never had a response from Stacey, and I haven't. I'm honest. The only lawyers who have responded to me are people who are high-profile lawyers, but they're not directly currently involved in the case, and they responded in relation to the psychological stuff that I offered. Fair enough. That's my area of expertise. But yeah, I've sent lots and lots of emails, and I don't get any response. They're probably sick of me because I get excited and I send something, and to be honest, I kind of regret like the rush that I have had sometimes to send things, because then my opinions evolved and I'm like, does that take away my credibility? I've kind of like kept people in the loop as I've evolved through this process. And I think like a little bit like we were saying how multiple pings can show an overall direction. I think for me, I've had some, not outliers, but some times where there's been stuff that I've thought was really useful that has subsequently been proven not to be exactly correct, and I've kind of had to adjust. But I think that's how an investigation goes, right? It's about hypothesis testing and then, looking at it more deeply and seeing if it holds up to the test, and then asking yourself more questions. And that's what I've done to come to this point. But I'm pretty happy now, with what I've just kind of discussed today, because I do feel like that that now I'm not seeing a lot of holes in this argument. Again, I could be wrong, and happy to hear from people if they do feel like there are holes. I suppose I was also going to raise that. It's interesting because I have actually had a lot of people just dismiss what I'm saying. It's kind of pushed me to just keep going and going and going. If people had just accepted and responded to me really positively in the initial days, I probably wouldn't have got to this point. So interestingly, I can kind of thank the people who were trying to kind of dismiss me and undermine me, because it's actually really helped me to continue to grow and gain more perspective and information. So I'm happy about that. So I don't know really what to do, because I know that sending this to the lawyers could fall on deaf ears. I will send it again. I guess this final kind of part with Cheyenne Mills stuff that I kind of came up with yesterday has really only just happened. And so I only just sort of came and I kind of consolidated it yesterday. So I will prepare a document and email to send to Stacey, Andy, Jennifer. I don't send things to Brad because I don't have his email address. And I don't send things to Mark because I don't have his email address. But I send it to any of the email addresses I can find, essentially, of the key lawyers who've been involved in this case. And I will do that again. But if you guys think that anything that I have included here makes sense to you and you feel like you want to approach the lawyers, please do, because they may listen to some new people's opinion more than the person who has spammed their email for the past few months. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, actually, Peggy, I could maybe reach out to Hannah Shakespeare. Because I'm such a small voice, where there are a lot louder voices, I feel like it's really hard to get any of my points across. Because whenever I'll post these things on Reddit or Twitter, and in fact, I often, now it's getting better, but initially they were just sort of downvoted into oblivion and dismissed. So because I'm not a well-respected or known voice, I think that people don't dig deeper into what I have to say a lot of the time. And then that makes me scream it louder, which makes me less likely to be believed, because people are like, you're too much, which is the story of my life. Because I'm so passionate, people are like, enough, it's too much. But yeah, I do repeat myself because I'm like, please listen, please listen, please listen. Yeah, if you guys think that there is relevant stuff that appellate lawyers particularly could benefit from, but also from any of the legal team could benefit from, you're welcome to use parts of anything that I've shared today. Absolutely happy for you to do that, because this isn't about me saying, this is mine, don't steal it. It's about helping Rick Allen. I just want that innocent man to be home with his wife and to have justice. And I mean, obviously, ultimately, I hope that there's justice for those two beautiful girls who did not deserve the fate that they ended up having to endure. I'm worried that they will never get true justice, and that's because of the way that law enforcement have treated this investigation. I'm worried that that the truth has been buried so deep, but I do feel there's hope when it comes to uncovering the truth about Rick Allen and his innocence. Night Hebby, thank you so much. You are amazing. I really love you, and I can see why you're so adored by everyone in the community. You're just a lovely, gorgeous person. So thank you so much. I can end there. I've got a work thing in about an hour, but yeah, does anyone have any final thoughts or questions? I probably I won't present it in this way again, because that would just be repetitive, but I'm happy to present aspects of it if there's areas we want to dig deeper into or further into. I'm going to try and create some shorts. I'm going to keep spamming Twitter to see if I can get people to oh gosh, Ron Logan's back from the grave. Yeah, but yeah, so I will continue to put some stuff out there. I don't love doing lives because I'm a bit self-conscious. I'm self-conscious in terms of like, because I ramble, and also like today I haven't put myself on the camera, but I don't really love putting myself on the camera because I get really self-conscious. I've still got my wild chemo hair, and I'm not ashamed of it, but yeah, people are cruel in this community. So, and also I don't like just talking to myself. I mean, I can just talk for hours, as you can tell, but it'd be wonderful to talk to some other people. So I would love to team up. I know Diana and I have had some chats together. Don't know where Diana is today. Goodness. But yeah, if anyone else ever wants to team up. Can we ask you some questions while you're in here, Mr. Logan? I'm only joking. My personal opinion, I don't actually think Ron Logan is directly involved. I believe, maybe he knew something, but yeah, I don't believe that Ron Logan is the true offender in this case. And I mean, we can talk more about who I do think is, and some of the, I guess, we can speculate around who the true offenders are. I'm kind of cautious around it a lot of the time because I don't want to get in trouble for like alleging people did things without having anything to back it up. And that's why my central focus a lot of the time is on helping Rick. Yeah. So Rick Allen is innocent. He is a man who had vulnerabilities, and they were used against him. And I think there's definitely some transference, counter-transference. I'm trying to think which one it would be in this case. I mean, because it's counter-transference because I'm a therapist, but I'm not his therapist. But yeah, guys, I guess the overall vibe here is like Rick reminds me of my clients, of myself, who people who have high levels of anxiety and sensitivity and self-doubt, and reminds me of my dad, as well, because whilst Rick could not be my dad because I'm far older than his daughter, he reminds me of what my dad was like when he was alive. I lost my dad when he was in his 50s, suddenly, to a heart attack. And I guess, again, I feel for Brittany because she's lost her dad, and it sucks and it's not fair because it sounds like he was an amazing family man, just like my dad was. And my dad missed out on having his grandkids and the retirement that he deserved. But I hope that Rick won't miss out on that. He's already missed out on a lot and he doesn't deserve it. So, yeah, I definitely have a soft spot for Rick, and not because I'm simping for a child murderer. I know no one in here believes that, but I know other people will say that. And not because I have some strange kind of parasocial relationship with Rick. It's that I see Rick as he really is reminiscent and reminds me so much of people I know in my life, and people who I resonate really well with. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, I got sad even just talking about it now. It's been a long time, but yeah, my dad was the sort of guy that could have ended up in this situation, and he's just, because he was a gentle, sensitive soul and no links to any deviant crimes. He'd be a perfect patsy as well, wandering around, on a walk. He used to go for his walks with my beautiful dog Tigger, and they'd walk around. The kids in the area just loved my dog Tigger, absolutely adored him. He was like this such a cute dog. I wish I had a picture that I could pull up now, but I don't. He was a silky terrier cross Maltese, and he was this like picture perfect little chocolate box dog. And the kids, like, we lived next door to a park, and the kids would literally knock on the door and ask if my dad and the dog would come out, and we would be like, oh my gosh, this is going to look really strange, because, like, you got this middle-aged man with the dog, that he loved kids as well. And yeah, so I could definitely see him walking around on the trails with his dog and getting himself into strife as well. So I just I feel sad for Rick, and I feel sad for Brittany, and I feel sad for Kathy, and I just think that it's time for their life to, well, it won't get back to normal because Rick's going to need a lot of therapy and a lot of support, but at least to start building that life back again. Yeah, I hope that Rick can get the psychological treatment that he needs once he is released, to not only deal with everything that's happened through his incarceration, but also to deal with the lifelong struggles he's had, because a man that has struggled with his mental health since childhood and is still struggling to such a degree that he was suicidal in 2019, in that's midlife, to me suggests that he didn't get adequate mental health care throughout his life. And that's no shade on whoever was treating him, but more that, I do believe, again, this goes into my psychological analysis of Rick Allen based on what I know from the public available information. I do believe that there's more to Rick Allen than simply major depressive disorder and anxiety. I think that there may be other layers that need to be explored. And what I mean by that are things like OCD and neurodivergence that might actually, OCD technically falls under neurodivergence, that could actually help him to receive the treatment he needs to finally help him to settle his nervous system. Something that everybody deserves to have, a nervous system that is safe and settled. So it's somber, isn't it, when you think about this? I definitely get like little chills and pangs of grief and sadness when I think about Rick and the girls. I think so often in this case we get really kind of caught up in the details of the case, the drama of the investigation. Peggy Oak trauma, yes, yeah, I think so. I, as a clinician, I specialize in working with neurodivergent people. So a large proportion of my clientele would be a highly sensitive, gifted, OCD, ADHD, ASD, one or a lot of those. And so what we call the trauma kind of associated with being neurodivergent is neurodivergent trauma. And so the idea here is that neurodivergent people are born with a nervous system that is different to the neurotypical nervous system. So what it means, from my personal experience, and this is sort of anecdotal in terms of working with clients and myself, is that nervous system sensitivity that we see, where a lot of neurodivergent people and highly sensitive people, and that kind of fits under this umbrella, feel and perceive more in their environment. And imagine it's like we look at the slide that's on the screen right now, and the neurodivergent person sees every part of that slide, and the neurotypical person just sees the writing. And so the neurodivergent person's like, I can see the flowers and the heart. And then a neurotypical person's like, I can't see that. And nobody's trying to be kind of disagreeing with each other, but some people truly don't feel and experience the world in the same level of sensitivity or depth as others. And so there's this sort of unintentional gaslighting and a lack of mirroring and attunement that goes on in the life of people who are neurodivergent, unless they have a really, good support system and a good understanding of what their sensory needs are. Not just sensory, sorry, just needs in general, emotional needs are, then what we end up finding is a lot of those people hate themselves. They think there's something wrong with themselves. They think that, they're defective. They feel alone and alienated and othered. And I speak as a clinician, but also someone who's experienced that throughout my life as well, something I've only really sort of fully come to understanding even about myself, even as someone who has been in therapy throughout my life as a clinician, recognizing just how much the way that my nervous system is wired has definitely traumatized me in a way. And I guess what we're doing when we're talking about neurodivergence is helping people to see, well, neurodivergence is not bad, it's not weak, it's not a disorder. It's actually just a different wiring. And if that wiring is understood, then we can gain so much beautiful wisdom from that. We need to have every different type of nervous system and person in this world, or most anyway. But the problem in this world, again, going back to my kind of overall groupthink kind of issue that I have, is that we don't seem to be okay with that. We seem to say everybody needs to fit into a neat box and do the very same thing. And that leads to the minority groups of this world feeling othered and excluded and misunderstood, and generally highly sensitive, internalizing people, which I believe Rick is, they blame themselves for that. Then you have the externalizers, they blame other people for that. And, that's often the people who go out and do commit, violent crimes because they feel wronged by society. But somebody like Rick, somebody like myself, we just keep trying harder. We just keep trying harder to be accepted, or we direct all the anger at ourselves, and that's shame and self-doubt. And when I hear, I guess, the limited information obviously we have about Rick based on the testimony of Westcott and Weiler, that's what I hear. I hear a man that internalizes and thinks that he's not enough, when the evidence doesn't necessarily show that. But where does that come from? Okay, so let's I'm turning into a psychology podcast now, which I love talking about, but this is not necessarily what the purpose of today is. So let me look at the chat. So Peggy, OCD is terrible. That's actually what made me become a psychologist. So I had pretty much, I'd say, a nervous breakdown at the age of 17, and OCD sort of started to take over my life. It's something that I've battled my entire life. Like, I've had a lot of successful treatment, which is why I do believe in the field that I work in, and it's helped me overcome a lot of the functional impairment. But there are still aspects of it, and this is where I think it sort of fits under neurodivergence, is just that my mind just has this tendency to go towards a sort of OCD mindset. And it's tough. Shivy, Daisy, do you want to know the meaning of the name Daisy? Well, Daisy was my beautiful, beautiful puppy dog. So Daisy was a dog that I got in 2013 after I split up. Oh, was it 2013? No, 2012. After I split up from my long-term partner, I was going to. He was my most significant long-term relationship, and we. I thought that he was the one. And when we split up, I felt devastated. I was thinking of getting my own place. I was about turning 30, and I thought, I'm going to get myself my little girl. And so I got Daisy Boo. She was this tiny little runt of the litter, rescue dog. I drove 6 hours to a place where the temperature was 42 degrees Celsius to pick up this little dog, and she vomited and diarrheaed the whole 6-hour trip back. We even have a really cute picture of her having a Sprite at McDonald's on the way home. And I'm going to cry now because she was one of the loves of my life. So in 2022, she had a seizure, and we discovered that she had an intracranial, what do they call it? Well, brain tumor. And we spent, I think, about $20,000 doing the top of the line stereotactic radiotherapy. And it didn't work. I mean, it was always terminal, but we thought we would buy ourselves more time. We bought ourselves 8 months, and she passed away in September 2022. And she was just my little girl. So, yeah, sorry, I'm starting to cry. But Daisy was just this, like, so she had 9 years with us. She was so such a cute little thing. She was this little, we called her Daisy Boo. She was like scruffy, and she basically was a tomboy. She'd jump around, and she loved going to the swimming pool. And so, she would jump around and go into the pool and swim laps and get into this little inflatable boat. And you didn't screw it up, Shivy. It's okay. It's therapeutic to talk about this. She had so much energy. She could jump so high. She was 8, Peggy, I think, around 8. Yeah. She could jump and like catch tennis balls in the air. And she was just this funny, scruffy little girl. We just loved her. And the fact that her name was Daisy, we dressed her up as a princess for her first birthday, and she looked like a little gorilla. She was little, so she was like a schnauzer crossed with something. We're not sure. She was found with her litter mates and her mum in a small town. So she was a real character, and she got me through a lot of difficult times in my life. And I was there as my first little daughter. And she was she's an inspiration. She's lovely, and I loved her so much. And so I see her as a bit of my spirit animal. So she loved the pool. Funny story, she used to, because she liked the pool, we had these tradesmen come in one day, and they were working, I think, on the outside patio. And when my mum got home from work, because we lived with my mum at the time, I still do live with my mum, they said to her, is the dog meant to be in the pool? And mum's like, no. And they're like, oh, she was swimming laps. So she had this thing. She was like so obsessed with a certain type of man, a man with muscles, like a tradesman essentially. And so whenever she would see those sorts of men, like, she'd just go wild. And so she was a real flirt. And so she loved the swimming pool. And after she passed away, I don't know if everyone's ever heard like the dragonfly sort of story that people talk about with grief. It was actually story that my mum had heard, and it was on the program actually for my dad's funeral. And it talks about, the bugs are under the water, and basically when they die, they become a dragonfly, and they can never come back and tell the bugs under the water what happens when you die, or where they go. And so we've always seen as like dragonfly as a symbolism of, loved ones who have passed away. And every time we'd go out to the pool that first summer after she'd gone, we'd see this dragonfly, and I made this joke, oh, that's Daisy visiting us. But it became really weird because this sounds silly, but I wasn't particularly at that time, I wasn't a very spiritual person. And every time though we'd go to the pool and I'd go, have we seen Daisy today? And the dragonfly would suddenly appear, and it would just like fly past my face. And we started to be like, it's responding to the name Daisy. Like, is it Daisy? And it really made my kids cope with the loss, and it helped me cope with the loss as well. And fun fact, well, not fun fact, but interesting. So when I was doing chemo for breast cancer, because it was post-COVID still, I wasn't allowed to take anyone other than the first chemo. And I was driving myself to chemo one day, and I was on a main road, not near any vegetation. And the dragonfly actually flew past. So, yeah, I don't know. My kids and I, we've always said when we see a dragonfly, it's Daisy, and have a bit of a dragonfly obsession. And so, I've got more spiritual stories since then because I lost my other beautiful spirit animal, Delilah, the year later, and that was another tragedy that we don't need to go into now because I'll definitely cry. But ever since I lost those two animals, I've had more spiritual experiences. So after I lost Delilah, two stray cats in a row turned up at my work again in an area where there are no houses nearby. The first one showed up maybe a few months after Delilah died and turned out to be a lost cat that, just showed up randomly in this courtyard to our kind of office building. And I befriended it, and we found out that it was lost by its owner, and we got it back home. And then I think it was like 6 or 9 months later, this Siamese cat started turning up as a stray. And again, random place, turned up out of the blue. And in that case, actually, the really long story, it did have an owner as a kitten, but it had been lost for 18 months and it was interstate, purebred Siamese, and I ended up finding a couple who'd lost their Siamese cat in the area. This wasn't their cat, but they ended up helping me to rescue her, and they've taken her in. And then their Siamese cat turned up, so they now have two. Anyway, long story short, it was almost like it was just very strange. It was like, is Delilah sending these little lost cat souls to me? I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like if there were a way Daisy and Delilah loved and trusted me, they would send lost souls to me, I think. Anyway, how many things have I covered today in this live? Anyone watching is going to be like, what are we talking about, right? Anyway, guys, I will go now because I do have a work lunch in half an hour that I need to get to. It's a farewell for one of my colleagues. I really appreciate you guys for sticking it out and hearing me out today. So nice to have made all these new friends in this community. It's been a real wild ride. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Shibby, for supporting me and being an awesome mod and rounding up people to come on in and join the live. Thank you, Peggy, for being really involved in chatting. And, of course, thank you, Heavy, again. I love you. You're awesome. And thank you so much for being a mod, being a supporter, and being so kind. And thank you, Jamie. I know I saw you talking before. I know Al's listening in. Thank you for always being a solid supporter. Dino, I saw you. Thank you so much for coming in. What else did I see? I'm just going back in time now. Ron Logan. Thanks, Ron Logan, for appearing from the dead to join us. I think, Carol, I know you popped by too, and you're a very loyal supporter. Thank you so much. If there's anyone that I've missed because I wasn't really watching the chat. Oh, Mimi, of course. Quad Axel Mimi, thank you. You're also a very loyal person who always who joins and chats with me so nicely. So I really appreciate you. Shout out to Diana. I know she's working, but she's actually one of the reasons that I have all of you people here because she connected me with you, and of course Prof as well. Shout out to everybody. Love and light to everybody. And let's keep fighting the good fight. I will speak to you soon. Bye.